Welcome to Venice Views. I'm Pam Johnson, Marketing and Communications Officer for the City of Venice, and today we continue our interview with the Curry family. They're the descendants of our first pioneer family, the Jesse Knight and Charles Curry families, and we're here in front of this turn-of-the-century house that was the Curry homestead. Join us while we hear some more stories about the Curry family roots and our roots.
My name is Ted Curry. My father was named Milton Curry, and he was born in that room right there. His father was Claude Curry. Claude and Mabel Curry did most of the raising of 10 kids right in this house, and most of them were born there. And as a kid, we used to come here several times a year to visit, and I remember this old house is very much a part of my childhood. Right across there was a huge sinkhole that's filled in now, big eucalyptus trees. They were just wonderful for carving, hearts and names in. And this porch here, I remember Claude knitting the nets that he used to use, or still would use, to cast over the mullet, and that would be part of the Thanksgiving dinners. They would barbecue these mullet and have big Thanksgiving dinners. Another dinner was what they call swamp cabbage or palm cabbage. That's the heart of a palm tree, just like these palm trees right here. When the pioneers were first here, dinner was right there very easily. You never starved in Florida. A lot of protein and a lot of vegetables. Some of the things I remember from this old house, there was this very warm feeling. Grandfather was this dynamic, large man that seemed 12 feet tall, but was over 6 foot. And Manaw, that was the grandmother's name, Mabel, his wife. She was this little woman, and she baked bread. One time I remember this was a sign of her approval and that you had been blessed by grandmother. She would make bread, just throwing in flour and sugar and this and that. And when it came out of the oven, she would cut off the heel, slather it with butter, sprinkle it with sugar, and then say, "Take this out in the yard and eat it." And if you were blessed with that, you know that you had made it as a grandchild.
My name is Ruby Curry. I married into the Curry family in 1947. My husband Morris was a barber, and we were a great part of this family. My children and I. We had many wonderful times together. And our dear Manaw, she made wonderful pies for Thanksgiving. She always made pumpkin pie and it's one like I can't remember the name of it, but it was so good. That was her favorite, and we always had a choice, but all the children wanted to have turkey. Instead of having turkey or ham or something, they always chose to have mullet. And as you've heard time and time again, they love mullet. That was one of their favorite things. And they could fix them so wonderful.
We loved mullet.
I'm Phyllis Curry, and I got lucky and married into the Curry family. I married Richard. And this house has always been full of love and laughter and so on. Manaw loved babies. She had 10. And if there was a baby in the crowd, she was holding it. That's all there is to it. But it's been you always felt welcome when you came in this house and so on. The big event was Thanksgiving. And it didn't matter where you were in the world practically, you had to appear here for Thanksgiving. And, it was the old timey when they barbecued and everybody brought something and so on. But it's been a wonderful experience, even being part of the family. It's a great family. And granddad too, he was a teacher, and he met Manaw. She lived out in Old Myakka on the river, and she was born there. Anyway, she was the Wilson family, and there are a lot of Wilsons too. Anyway, she was at a private school, and she came home for a visit and decided not to go back. So she finished her senior year in the little schoolhouse where Granddad taught. And after she graduated, after a little while, they were married and came here. And this house was built in 1907 by a pioneer, Granddad, and of material on right on the ground and so on. And it's been a happy house.
I have Ted Curry with me now, and Ted is the son of Milton Curry, who was the son of Claude Curry, and Claude, of course, the son of Charles Curry and Frances Victoria Knight Curry, who Frances was Jesse Knight's daughter,
Yeah.
and Jesse Knight was probably the first settler.
Yeah, he
in
was
this
one of the
area.
first ones in the last part of the 1800s. Came down into this area, drove a herd of cattle all the way from Georgia down when there were no roads, no fences, no nothing, and finally down into this area, and then expanded his cattle operation here. He had some of his sons and cousins and in-laws, and they made up a kind of a herded cattle. That was back when the Spanish cattle ran wild in the prairies and the scrubs, the palmettos and pine trees of Florida, and they were there for the taking. If you could go up and herd these cattle together, they called them crackers. They'd sweat, and they would herd these on these little ponies. They would herd these cattle together, and then you had to move them down to Punta Rassa, down around the Fort Lauderdale area. They would sell them and trade them for Spanish gold, and then a lot of the beef would go to Cuba. And they sold it to the Confederacy and gave to the Confederacy. They were Confederates. Then Jesse Knight, Claude, the man who built this house in 1908, bought the property from Jesse Knight because that was his mother's father. And he bought the land from here. This is 30 acres here. And they built a little house and then a bigger house here. This is 4 bedrooms upstairs, and a big living room and the fireplace downstairs and the master bedroom downstairs. And I remember there's a large room which is the dining room, and there was a big table there that would seat about 3 kids on each side and 2 adults on the end. And they put a new oilcloth on there every year. They didn't take the old one off. They just put a new oilcloth on there. And some of the kids, as they grew up, they said, I went to that table and I peeled back and I found the oilcloth. I remember this from when I was 9 years old.
Oh, what a great memory.
Yeah, and I remember there's things that you just don't have now. There was a pantry, kind of a rough area where you had dozens and dozens, literally hundreds of bottled, they called it canning at the time, and it'd be bottled field peas and tomatoes, and that would be a part of that would be the vegetable during off times of the year. There was always the fish, the mullets and the bays. The bays were not polluted then, and nor were the creeks, and so it was easy to get good fish out of there. And they would salt it or smoke it so that it would last. And then they would have a barrel of flour and a barrel of rice, and that became that with the garden vegetables. And they had a cow and a pig pen, and that was all part of a farm operation at that time. And you had to be a little bit of everything. Claude became a carpenter. His brother helped him rough this out, and then Claude finished it. And then Claude was a very active man. He was postmaster and justice of the peace and on the school board. And the house here was, I remember the back porch area had they had a old washing machine kind of like this, and you cranked and it ran, it squeezed it between 2 rollers, and there was the ice box. You put ice was delivered. You put that in the bottom of the of this chest, and it kept this chest cool.
The ice house was from near here, wasn't it?
Excuse me?
The ice house where the
Oh, yeah, I believe it was down there. Carl, the oldest son, worked at the ice house for a long time. There was no air conditioning back then. If it was in the 90s outside, he was sitting there in the ice house, very, very comfortable. Carl had airplanes and motorcycles. He was an adventurer.
My name is Cleo Seeley Curry. I was married to Ward Curry. His dad was Carl Curry, that was born and raised here in this house. And I can remember mostly his dad had an airplane, and there was no houses out here across the back, and he would land his plane there. And I was in the hospital, and he was flying my 4-year-old son around, and Carl would prop his arm up in the window of the plane, and so my son, Ward Jr., would prop his up there, and he was holding a Coke, and they'd buzz the hospital, and my son dropped his Coke, full Coke, in the middle of Venice, and Carl, it like scared him to death. He's afraid it was going to hit someone. So he took off out of Venice, and he said, I made it short. I didn't come back in till dark and landed. I was born and raised in the Everglades. My grandmother is full-blooded Seminole Indian. My dad worked for the Army Corps of Engineers, and we came here in 1947, or 46. I was 16 and he was 21, just out of service. Oh, I was still in high school when I met him. I was here for the summer, and he had a broke leg. He had broke riding a motorcycle, and that's how I met him in front of Granddad. Had a little store on Main Street.
My name is James Curry. The family calls me Jamesy. I'm a grandson of Claude and Mabel, and my mom and dad is Ruby, which you just met. If you wonder why I'm so good looking, I'm a son of Ruby and Morris the barber. Some of my fondest memories were right here on the front porch. I had the youngest boy of the family was Gale, the youngest of 9. He was born with Down syndrome, but he was sharp as a tack. He had a memory like a steel trap. One day a guy pulled up in the front yard, and everybody saying, who in the world is that guy? Nobody knew who he was. Big old black Buick. Gale stands up, walks over there, shakes him by the hand, and calls him by name. Hadn't seen him in 30 years, called him by name, and nobody knew who he was. He loved music. He had about 50 graphophone albums. Couldn't read or write, but he put the right album in the right cover. The Florida Boys, the Rebels Quartet, Tennessee Ernie Ford. I mean, he loved it, and he loved to fly. One day, my dad landed out here in that same old Stearman biplane. Had 2 seats, one in front of each other. Gale, you want to go flying? Yes, son, let's go. He gets Gale in the front, straps him in so he'll have a better view. He goes over there, props her over, crawls in the back, and he's checking out the carburetor heat and magnetos. He starts to pour the coal toward the takeoff, and Gale turns around and says, you drive, you drive. He thought he was going to have to fly the plane because he was in the front seat, So they went out flying and came back. And he was quite a diplomat. He would come up and he wouldn't say, I like ice. He says, Jamesy, you like ice cream? He'd kind of, Jamesy, you like bread and butter? And man, all made some good bread and butter, but Gale was a cool guy, really cool guy.
And on the back porch, you could see history as it had unfolded. There was the washing machine, but also Dad was a bit of a historian. He had pictures of, I just recreated it, but she had done that when she was younger. They boiled it in a big witch's cauldron. You boiled the shirts in there, and then you took them out, picked them out with a piece of firewood, and you put them on this stump, and they called it battling them. And they were smack, 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 smack. And that replicated the action of the washing machine. Then you had to rinse them and hang them up. That was everything very labor intensive. Oh, yes. And they grew a lot of beans and peas and tomatoes and cabbages and papayas and guavas. And of course, in his orange grove, he planted the seeds to get the rootstock. He planted old wild orange seeds and rough lemon seeds, and you would plant a bed of them, and then when it got about this big around and about this tall, you would clip buds from other people would give you buds. You would cut a T, insert that bud in there, bandage it up, and that would grow the new tree. Then you'd cut the top off of there, and you had a new tree. And he would put that out, and so he had 30 acres of most of that 30 acres was tangerines, grapefruits, oranges.
And so your dad Milton grew up here with his 9 brothers and sisters in this 4-bedroom house. Yeah. And so, but they all went to school.
Yeah, there was small schools here. Claude became a teacher. He was a teacher. My father, Milton, was a teacher. I was a teacher. My mother was a teacher. My sister was a teacher. So this is being in the education business. This is a family heritage. There was a piece of furniture in there that stayed there the entire time, and I didn't know it until after it was handed to me The dad had made that when he was 18 years old.
Oh.
Kind of a, they called them secretaries, I believe. It had pigeons hole like this and a plate that would fall down like this, held on chains that you would use for a writing surface. He was a very handy man.
It sounds like it, yeah. Such an interesting family. So they must have been pretty courageous and pretty adventurous, all of them, to come to this wilderness and make a life here.
You had to be. You had to have a great deal of ingenuity and determinism, and also the mosquitoes would sometimes be so thick between here and that second fence over there, there would be a haze that you almost couldn't see through. And you didn't just slap a mosquito like that. You raked them off like this, and you breathed in through your mouth, spitting out mosquitoes you didn't breathe in through your nose. They were that bad sometimes.
If I hadn't been to the Everglades, I would not be able to relate to that at all. Because
in the bedroom in there were little cans, coffee cans, under the legs of the bed. And I asked them, "What is that for?" They said, "Oh, he poured kerosene in there." And so that the insects couldn't crawl up the legs of the bed because of that kerosene. He just didn't want company, insect company in the bed with you. And that was the way they dealt with that.
How ingenious.
Yeah. And I remember Manaw taking me out and showing me particular varieties of guavas. They had a calamandan tree that was, I think it was over the septic tank. Boy, what a display that one was. There was a very primitive, and it made things closer to the earth, it seemed like. But then Claude actually was very advancing. He tried to do the newest thing. He had carbide lamps piped around the house, but that didn't work very well. It corroded the pipes. But he would read by the kerosene lantern. Kerosene lantern with a little index card so it wouldn't glare in his eyes. And you picked up the lamp chimney underneath. Do not grab the bell of it because it would blister your fingers. And so kerosene lamps were the light.
My father, Wayne Elliott, and I, when I was a youngster, come over and run electricity through the house. Manaw wasn't real happy about it, but progress is what Daddy would always tell us.
The food that they ate, there's been talked a lot about the mullet. I remember that there was a lot of rice eaten in the diet of that family, and I still like a lot of rice myself. Manaw, we called her Manaw, this was Mabel. She would, for breakfast, for the guys who were working in the fields, it would be a very high-calorie meal, and so it might be fried rice with a jar of these tomatoes poured over and onions, and there might be grits and fish. And so all the children said were quite healthy because they had a high protein diet. There was plenty of protein around here just if you just went out and got it.
Well, Tad, thank you so much for telling us these stories, sharing your family's history, because it is all of our history in a sense, because we live here. They're the people that created this beautiful place and among the people. So thanks so much. I appreciate it. And we hope that you enjoyed this program too. We look forward to seeing you again next time when we bring you more Venice Views.